societal issue. But I think perhaps even more important to some of us is that it's an issue for us ourselves too. It's a major issue for ourselves. Because ultimately, when we can't deal with other people, or when we don't want to deal with other people, because they come from a different culture or race, or when we look down on other people for that, that's essentially a form of arrogance. In fact, it's a very pointless form of arrogance, because we don't choose where we're born, we don't choose our parents, we don't choose our native language. As Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, let's have a salawat for him. Well, as it's related that he said in Najl Balagha, that, you know, if anyone in the world had the right to be arrogant, it would be whom? Who's the highest of people? Who are the highest of people? Who? Yes, Ahlul Bayt, beginning with the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if anyone had the right to be arrogant, it would be the Holy Prophet and the prophets and their awliya, because these are the best of people. You don't get better than that. But, he continues, Allah decreed that they should be humble and worship Him that way, and the only arrogance, so to speak, belongs to Allah. So basically, to paraphrase what he's saying, he's telling the people, what right do you have to be arrogant when the Prophet of Allah, who is the best of creation, has no arrogance at all? But then he continues, he gives us some very good advice. He says, and again I'm paraphrasing here, look, there's some people who just can't help being arrogant. There's some people who just have to be a little bit proud or perhaps full of themselves sometimes. I'm sure perhaps you've met people like that sometimes. They need to brag about things. They really need to be someone. So he tells the people, and I think this advice is equally true today, that if you need to be proud and arrogant, don't be proud over your lineage. You didn't do anything to be born to certain ancestors. Instead, be proud over your good deeds. Do some good things for society, or at least good things for yourself, and at least have pride in that. You're going in the right direction. You know, so instead of I'm American, so I'm number one, say, well, I built an orphanage. I did something really great. And I built houses for homeless people. And I taught a bunch of people how to read. And I dug a well. And of course, this is not good either, because riyah and so forth is also a sin. It's not good to be excessively proud of our good deeds, but it's a step in the right direction. It's better than simply being proud of what we happen to be born in the sense of pride. It's okay and it's good to love your homeland, but not in the sense of being arrogant or looking down on other people. So if we suffer from that, it's better to be taking pride in the positive and constructive things we are doing for humanity, and then inshallah we can work on reducing that too. So that was the advice of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And of course it is very important advice, because we do have to remember, it's narrated from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that someone who has even the smallest amount, very smallest amount of arrogance, God forbid, will not be able to enter Jannah. That's a very serious thing. That's a very serious threat. We do need to look inside ourselves and ask ourselves, is there anything that is making me arrogant and proud? Because God forbid, this may stand between myself and paradise in the next world. So that's a very serious thing. So this is not only a social issue, it is also an individual issue. Therefore, it's an important issue to look at in our communities. Now, a lot of times we do hear the "there is no racism in Islam" speech. At least I hope we hear it sometimes. I hope we have the "we should all be united, we're brothers and sisters, we face the same qibla, and we're one ummah" speech, and followers of Ahlul Bayt. Inshallah, we hear that speech. If we don't, then perhaps we need to be giving it, because it is an issue we face. But giving that speech doesn't really seem to have a lot of effect on how people live their lives, as far as I can tell. And I suspect there's a couple reasons for that. I think the main reason is that it's one thing to tell people what they need to do, and it's quite another to tell them how to do it. Because sometimes we're told to do something, or we want to do something, but we haven't the faintest idea how to get there. So for example, let's say I have a student. Anyone here in A-levels? You? Okay. So let's say you're doing A-level physics. So I tell you, you need to get an A-star on your A-level physics exam. Well, that's great. Everyone wants to have an A-star. But the reason why not everyone has an A-star, it's not because they're not intelligent or something, it's because they don't know the proper procedures to go through to earn that A-star. How should they revise? How should they study? What kind of tutoring sessions should they have? How should they focus in lab class, etc.? If you have the procedure, it's much easier to get to the goal. So I think that's our issue, one of our issues with the, sorry to say, problem with disunity in our community. It is the sense that we understand we need to be united, but we're not sure how to go about doing it. I also think when it comes to this issue of cultural disunity, it's also a situation of we're not really aware that we're doing it when we're sometimes doing things which might be a little bit disrespectful to other cultures or, God forbid, racist or something. Because we tend, as human beings, to see ourselves as normal and our way of doing things as normal. And even as followers of Ahl al-Bayt, inshallah, we do have different ways of practicing our religion in different cultures, and they're fine, they're halal, but we just have different habits. So for example, some people use alams, and some people do not, and some people recite nasheeds quietly, some do it loudly, etc. These are things, they don't matter one way or another, but we do have differences. But sometimes we don't realize necessarily when we are criticizing other people just for being different. So there's a bit of self-reflection that needs to go on. But therefore, I think the how is the biggest thing. I'd like to mention 3 ways that I do think we can work on this as a community, inshallah. So perhaps you can take this message to people outside of this room, because it is an issue we do face in many places, especially in Europe, I think. How number 1? It's quite simple. And that is we should try, we do need to have respect for people who come from other cultures that are different from us. I know that sounds really obvious and really elementary, but it's something that needs to be done consciously. And I do have to say, one of the things that has really saddened me and also very much surprised me, and I'm not saying this is anyone in this room here, but to see sometimes some people in our community, so as Muslims and as a minority, looking at people from other minority communities and making fun of them. So I'm not picking on the sisters here, but just because I'm female and I spend more time with females. So for example, you're walking down the street, maybe we're wearing, abayas or something, so we look a little bit different. Sometimes people who are not Muslims, they stare. We're used to this. When you wear hijab, people stare at you. So you'd think, as Muslims would understand what it's like for people to stare at us or to make fun of our names or whatever it happens to be. But then sometimes I've seen some people in our community point at someone who's, say, wearing African clothing or some kind of Asian clothing or monks or whatever, go, oh my God, look what he's wearing, ha ha ha, it's so funny. Or, some of our Salafi Muslims, they, wear a little bit short clothing, oh, ha, look at him, and it's like, come on. People are looking at us like that, they're laughing at us. I'm not saying we're doing anything laughable, but let's just, we know what it feels like. Why would we go and do that to other people? We should at least understand what it means to be a minority, and especially to other, sometimes Muslims of other cultures, making fun of what they're doing or how they're talking or how they're interacting with their kids, as long as it's halal. We're talking about things that are mubah, not haram things, which is something else. We don't really have a right to be making fun of it. And furthermore, we don't gain anything by doing that either. You don't see anyone from Ahl al-Bayt or, the very pious people in our history putting down other people. You don't get anything constructive out of it, and it's related from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, as a matter of fact, that the only thing that makes someone arrogant or sort of put themselves over other people is because deep down they really feel ashamed of themselves and some sense of inferiority. Believe it or not, this is a hadith. It's not just some psychological thing that people say, and it's quite true. And I think we might suffer from that ourselves. I know some of us feel a bit of a lack of self-confidence as Muslims living here. I mean, I've only been living in Europe for 3 years, but I feel like some of the mainstream society tends to look down on us. So there might be a tendency to put that on other people because we're experiencing that. But we have to stop ourselves and say, wait a minute, this is not the way of Ahl al-Bayt, this is not constructive, and it is contributing to this problem. Okay, so this is number one, simply respecting people from other backgrounds and respecting differences. And by the way, note that I am saying respecting, because these differences are real. One of the ways that we really fail at this unity thing is by saying that everyone is the same and pretending there are no differences. Cultural differences are real. They are important in the sense that they exist, and it's fine. We can have different ways of interacting with people, or different ways of dressing, different ways of cooking, different ways of dealing with small children, etc. As long as it's halal, it's okay. You know, so the differences are real, but that shouldn't stop us from being able to work together and get along. Okay, so that was how number one. How number two is also quite simple, and that's simply to know more about each other, to know more about other cultures, as related from Amir al-Mu'mineen, alayhi salam. Let's have another salawat for him. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And it's also related from a number of other people throughout human history, I might add. People are enemies of those things that they do not know. So when we don't know about a language that someone is speaking, we don't like it. Well, I don't make fun of it. Some people make fun of it. Or if we've never seen gourmet sabzi, for example, someone looks at this green thing, they say, oh, I don't think I'm going to be eating that today, etc. So when we don't know about something, then we don't really appreciate it. But it is by coming to know each other and taking the trouble to know each other and know about each other that we can, I mean, to sound a bit cliche, but appreciate the diversity we do have in our ummah. So instead of making fun of someone's language, learning a few words, instead of thinking their practices are weird, figuring out why they're doing what they're doing, etc. And of course, these are the easy things to talk about, food and so forth. But they do say that 90% of cultural differences are invisible. That it's only, you know, a few things that we can actually see the difference: food, clothing, language, etc. But the real differences are in how we interact with each other, the expectations we have of each other, these sort of unwritten rules, etc. And these are the things that really differ from people to people. So sometimes you do have to take some time to appreciate. But if we do have this approach where we want to appreciate each other, then inshallah it will change our community. So those were two things. And finally, number three, inshallah, is the most enjoyable way, and that's something mentioned in Dua al-Iftitah. So the Sheikh who was speaking before me gave us a preview of Dua al-Iftitah for the month of Ramadan to get us started a bit. And he was mentioning part of the dua where we do complain to Allah Ta'ala about some of the difficulties we're facing in our community. And of course, this is one of the difficulties that is mentioned in this dua, this disagreement, this disunity. Undoubtedly, this was a problem back in the day for the Muslims, but I think this dua was quite prophetic also. It's not just a prayer, but also a prophecy about the situation we would find ourselves in. But fortunately, the same dua, which we recite in the month of Ramadan, also gives us a solution. For example, it says, "Ishfi bihi sudurana, wadhhab bihi ghayda qulubina." So the key word in there is bihi. So by him, heal our hearts. By him, remove the hatred and anger and dislike from our hearts. And who is him in this dua? Specifically, this him is referring to Imam Zaman. May Allah hasten his return. Salawat. And we do know that when he does return, inshallah it is soon, that he will solve all of these problems for the world, not only for the Muslims or Shia or someone else, but there will be worldwide solutions to these problems. But for those of us, inshallah, who would like to be his followers now, these things can be solved for us now by deepening our allegiance to Imam Zaman. Literally through him finding a solution to these problems that are discussed in Dua al-Iftitah. So inshallah, it is through our allegiance to him that our hearts would be healed. Inshallah, it is through him that any sort of bad feeling or dislike or any of these other things would be taken away from us. So this wilayah towards Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam is very powerful, not only on an individual level, but also on a social level. So inshallah, I think one of the best things we can pray for tonight on a very blessed night like this, which is said to be one of the most holiest nights of the year and one of the nights in which our hajat are accepted, inshallah. Among all of the other things we are doing dua for, inshallah, we should pray to have the blessing of having the true wilayah of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And if we do that sincerely, inshallah, Allah Ta'ala will grant us this blessing and we will see the immediate and very rapid effects both on ourselves and also on our communities. And please remember me in your prayers tonight too. So thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
عبر الكلمات التي تعبر عن الشكر والتقدير للباحثة القديرة، وهي تتجول